Few students against the strike went into court asking injunction, forcing colleges and universities to provide the classes even during the strikes. This only created chaos, and most of the colleges and universities are now fighting the injunction, saying the health and safety of their teachers and the students are now compromised. On the 22nd of March, the students organized a big rally in Montreal, and more than 200,000 people showed up, making this one of the biggest demonstrations in Quebec history. The struggle is still going on, and we ask you to show your solidarity in any which way you can with the students, and we'll be glad to transmit them your support. Now for the national question. Last year, as a result of the federal election, Quebec sent a majority of Federalist MPs for the first time since the 1989 elections. It seemed then that the idea of separation was dying. But when we look closely to the result, it is more and more obvious to us that there are two solitudes in Canada. 83 of the voters in Quebec rejected the Conservatives and gave Canada a last chance. Meanwhile, the rest of Canada, 88% of the rest of Canada voted for the Conservative. Shame. For the longest time, we gave our votes to the Liberals, but after the repatriation of the Constitution without Quebec, we put a cross on them. Later, we gave a majority to the Conservative, who were then very different from the ones governing now. They tried really hard to bring us back in the Constitution, but each failed because of the Federalists. The Bloc Québécois was then founded and ruled over Quebec for 20 years. The only political party we didn't already try was the NDP. We gave them a majority of seats for the first time in our history, but the rest of Canada chose a radical right-wing government that was against gun control, free choice, bilingualism, and etc., etc. We will see where it leads us. Since the conquest of 1763, there has been a separatist movement in Quebec, even though at first it was marginal. It's only in the 60s the idea of independence of Quebec grew a lot. It all started with the language issue. Marcel Chaput, a scientist working for the federal government, felt as if every morning when he entered his office, he left his coat, his hat, and his mother tongue on the peg at the door of his office. He resigned and founded the Ralliement pour l'Indépendance Nationale, RIN, a political party fighting for the independence of Quebec. He also wrote a book, Why I Am a Separatist, that became a bestseller in Quebec. The language issue is what fueled the idea of Quebec getting out of the Canadian Federation. As a Minister of Natural Resources in the Liberal Lesage government in the 60s, René Lévesque was once invited to visit a mine by the steelworkers to look at the working condition of the miners. What appalled him the most was the fact that all the health and safety rules were in English only, even though none of the workers spoke English. The reason why the labor movement supports the sovereignty of Quebec has a lot to do with the language. Some facts demonstrate this. There was a 10-week labor dispute in the Université de Montreal for the right to have access to manuals in French. There was a 3-month strike in GM in Boisbriand near Montreal for the right to receive orders in French, because you see, even if the supervisor and the employee were of French expression, they had to speak to each other in English on the site. To get a promotion in major companies like Air Canada, CN, CPs, GM, and any banks, you had to speak English. French Canadians saw newly arrived immigrants get promotion before them because they spoke the language of the boss, a language that they mastered because they had no obligation to send their kids into the French education system. Today, we are still fighting to have access to French manual in some industrial sectors. It's hard to believe, but it's true. The other main reason why labor movement supports Quebec sovereignty is that the province economical elites used to be all English, and they had a lot of power over our governments, which brings us to the topic.
So a lot of the movement has to do with taking back the control over our finances and economy. In Quebec, in our history, we created three major financial institutions that are a kind of unique on their own. The first one was created at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1901, the Desjardins movement, which is a credit union movement. Because banks then did not accept, you had to have to put this amount to open an account. And most of French Canadians didn't have that money, so they couldn't have a bank account. So Desjardins, Alphonse Desjardins created the Desjardins movement for where you didn't have any minimal amount to open the account. So now Desjardins is one of the major financial institutions in Quebec. That's one of the first institutions. Then in 1966, we founded, Quebec founded the Caisse de dépôt in order to manage the money that Quebecers put in RRQ, which is the equivalent in Quebec of your CPP, Canadian Pension Plan. So the Caisse collected the money, but the money people put in RRQ and reinvested them, mainly in Quebec, to fuel our development. I say them because now the rules have changed a bit. They're investing in other places, and sometimes, like there's a debate right now, they're investing in the tar sands of Alberta. So there's a big debate on this. Then, at the beginning of the 1980s, I was very young at the time, but older people reminded me that there was a major economical crisis, a bit like the one we are living right now, where, I don't know in Toronto or in Ontario, but the unemployment rates was at 15%, and the mortgage rates, to buy a house, the mortgage rates were at 21–22%. Major economical crisis where banks, every time there is a crisis, what do the banks do? They stop lending money to people and companies. So a lot of companies closed, not because they were doing bad jobs, bad products, or they had bad employees, but only because the banks stopped lending them money to go through this crisis. So the government of Quebec then, under René Lévesque, called the major social partners, the unions, the bosses, and around the table and say, how could we get out of this crisis? We need solutions. He asked the unions, don't come and yell that everything's going wrong. You're going to come at the table and bring solutions. So the FTQ went, and the FTQ, Louis Laberge, a long-time president of the FTQ, went and suggested that the government of Quebec create an investment fund where workers that still had a job would invest money in their RRSP, and the government would reinvest that money in our economy in order to maintain jobs. The government refused, but the FTQ decided to go ahead on their own. They founded the Fonds Solidarite, which is almost unique in the world. It's an investment fund which today holds $8 billion in assets, all controlled by the FTQ. It saved and maintained or created created more than 500,000 jobs in 27 years of history. And it's still today controlled by the FTQ. And the money that the workers put in that fund, 60% has to be reinvested in the Quebec economy. I say it's unique, but there are in the world maybe now 2 or 3 funds. Like in Algeria, the Algerians create their own fund, and there was one in Senegal, and the Bulgarians now are looking at this idea, but still it's one of the biggest. It's a unique investment fund. At first, all the bosses and the people in finance said union workers cannot manage money, don't invest in there. But even during the 2008 crisis, we had better return on an investment than any banks and any major other investment funds. So.
In conclusion, we want to put the stress on the fact that the sovereignty of Quebec is not a vote against Canada and its people. It's a vote in favor of controlling our destiny and our institutions. It will not break the solidarity that we have built with the working people of Canada. It has been built over 100 years, and no boundaries can destroy it. Solidarity.